The world before the late 1970s. The energy crisis, primarily involving oil, was reaching its peak. Americans were living in fear as the Soviet Union had just completed 2 oil and gas pipelines from Siberia to Western Europe. Meanwhile, European nations were becoming increasingly dependent on Soviet energy, an extremely dangerous situation for the USA. Not only were USA allies relying on their greatest enemy, but Western Europe's energy purchases provided the Soviet Union with strong foreign currency reserves. These funds would allow them to further modernize their military. That scenario, unfortunately, did not unfold. In 1982, a mysterious explosion occurred on a Soviet gas pipeline. Evidence pointed to possible CIA involvement in the incident. If true, the risk of war due to conflicting interests between the 2 superpowers had never been more imminent. Was the explosion an accident, or was it a calculated move by the USA to indirectly attack the Soviet Union? We will answer this question in this video. The secret invasion. As the world was deeply entrenched in the Cold War, with the USA and the Soviet Union engaged in a frenzied arms race, a mysterious explosion shook the vast Siberian region. The explosion was visible from space through satellite images. A government source revealed that the USA had attacked the Soviet gas pipeline using the first-ever cyber weapon. Somehow, the CIA had inserted a virus into the pipeline's control and stabilization system, leading to the disaster recorded in history. Leaked documents also revealed that a KGB intelligence officer had assisted the USA in this operation. And the attack was secretly ordered by this man, President Ronald Reagan. In June 1982, White House official Thomas C. Reed stated that they had just received a shocking intelligence image capturing what appeared to be a massive explosion deep within the Soviet Union. This information could potentially determine the fate of the world as the Cold War was at its peak. Was it a missile launch, a weapons accident, or was the Cold War turning hot? The Department of Defense research institutions and technical experts all agreed that the incident was extremely serious. But everything remained a mystery. Seconds later, this man appeared. Gus Weiss, a mysterious and eccentric figure. But many in the intelligence community were equally eccentric. As a senior White House advisor on intelligence and technology, his eccentricity was understandable. He approached Reed and asked, "Have you heard about the explosion?" "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." It all took less than 30 seconds. Very brief and concise. Reed put the incident aside and continued his work. As a special assistant to President Reagan on national security matters, Reed was accustomed to such events. The White House logs were always inexplicably full each day. If one spent too much time dwelling on every detail, nothing would ever get done. But something still felt off. The insane explosion continued to haunt Reed's mind. What exactly had happened in that remote Siberian tundra? Years later, still troubled by the mystery, he sought out the man who had once told him not to worry, Gus Weiss. It was 1995, the year Thomas Reed began writing his book. When he called, Gus Weiss was equally surprised and replied, "That's an interesting story." More than just interesting, Gus Weiss revealed to Reed one of the Cold War's greatest hidden secrets. The story of a double agent within the KGB, and how the Soviet Union had stolen USA national secrets for decades. And also the possibility that the CIA had retaliated by blowing up the Siberian gas pipeline. It was the world's first cyber attack, carried out through a malicious software. At the time, malicious software was defined as a program that operated normally until it received an unexpected command. The CIA had planted such software into the Soviet gas pipeline's control system, causing it to destroy itself from the inside as efficiently as possible. In today's era, we see cyberattacks happening as frequently as beauty pageants, some even on the scale of full-scale military campaigns. This makes investigating the cause of the 1982 Siberian pipeline explosion more crucial than ever for modern historians. It was certainly one of the first major cyberattacks in history. It has been investigated, analyzed, and seriously questioned. However, the details of the attack remain elusive. Such is the nature of intelligence history, always vague and difficult to decipher. In 1980, Ronald Reagan became the next president of the United States. This event marked the beginning of a new era in foreign policy. He strongly opposed the detente policy the USA had been pursuing with the Soviet Union. In Reagan's eyes, America was in grave danger. During the 1970s, the USA and the Soviet Union had cooperated to some extent through nuclear arms control agreements. Reagan's skepticism toward detente became clear in July 1981 at an international economic conference in Canada. During the conference, the French president privately met with Reagan and showed him a classified document about a highly successful French intelligence operation. The French had established a secret connection with a Soviet KGB intelligence officer named Vladimir Vetrov. He claimed to be an analyst at a secret KGB division known only as Directorate T. Directorate T was reportedly the Soviet Union's central hub for both scientific and technological espionage. If this were true, then Vetrov's workplace was one of the most critical departments within the KGB. Vetrov told the French that detente was a blatant lie. Director T had hundreds of active agents. These operatives exploited detente to infiltrate, stealing Western scientific and technological advancements for the Soviet Union. They called these units technology acquisition teams. Each KGB agent embedded themselves deep into factories, scientific research labs, and even the American military to steal technology. This included bribing scientists, turning them into high-value informants for Moscow. In short, the Soviet Union was using stolen American technology and engineering to build and prepare for its own war efforts. This significantly shortened the time required for the Soviet Union to research and produce weapons. As Vetrov revealed more information, both France and the USA realized the full scale of the KGB's intelligence operations against them. It must have been a shocking moment for everyone involved. The detente policy of the 1970s, pursued by both sides, had allowed Soviet scientists to visit numerous Western research facilities. This helped to ease tensions brought on by the Cold War. Soviet scientists were even granted visits to Boeing factories. Can you believe it? With just a small piece of adhesive tape on the soles of their shoes, they could easily collect tiny metal dust samples from the Boeing factory floors. Even these minute samples were enough for the Soviets to determine the materials used in Boeing aircraft bodies. And it didn't stop there. Soviet agents weren't limited to official visiting delegations. Many operated undercover in Western countries, living as ordinary citizens for decades. Some of them even built families and had successful careers in their target countries. Their identities were so well protected that it was nearly impossible to trace any links to Moscow. What Vetrov revealed to the CIA and French intelligence exposed the operation's massive scale. It was the largest operation of its kind since the 1940s. Ronald Reagan's greatest fear was that the Soviets would steal defense technology. But after leaving his meeting with the French president, Reagan saw a clear opportunity for retaliation. His suspicions about the Soviet Union were officially confirmed. Most people knew that Reagan would strike back, but the question was how and who would be involved. Reagan feared that the stolen technology would allow the Soviets to rapidly complete a massive engineering project, the Trans-Siberian Pipeline. To understand why a gas pipeline over 14,000 kilometers away worried the U.S., let's take a closer look. This is the Urengoy gas field, discovered in 1966. At the time, it was the largest natural gas field ever found. With its invisible power, it was like a potential energy weapon for the Soviet Union if they could harness it. Thus, completing the massive Trans-Siberian gas pipeline became an urgent priority. With this gas field, the Soviet Union positioned itself as an indispensable part of the continent's economy, something the Reagan administration feared. In the event of a conflict or dispute, Berlin and Paris would have no choice but to concede, rather than face a frozen Europe. Reagan's concerns escalated even further when he learned that KGB agents were stealing Western technology. Reagan sent information about Vetrov directly to the CIA, providing them with the full truth as revealed by the French. The CIA planned to use this intelligence to sabotage and retaliate against Soviet projects. But could they trust information provided by a KGB double agent? Some details of the story raised suspicions. Vetrov had once been a patriotic Soviet military officer stationed abroad, living a relatively privileged life as a KGB agent. He had no need for money or personal gain. The French reported that he revealed national secrets in broad daylight at a park in Moscow. Could Vetrov have been setting a trap for his superiors? Scientific and technological espionage is a highly specialized field. One must have in-depth knowledge of what they are observing. If you, I, or any ordinary person were to walk into a Boeing factory, chances are no technology would be stolen. Vetrov had been stationed in Paris, one of the most prestigious posts a KGB agent could hold. He spent 5 to 6 years there and deeply loved the city. But when he was reassigned to Moscow, he became extremely discontent. His marriage was also falling apart. Alcohol became an inseparable part of Vetrov's life. He was essentially experiencing a full-blown personal crisis. His ambitions and desires remained unfulfilled. The KGB had failed to give him what he truly wanted. Seeking revenge against the KGB, Vetrov revealed some of the most explosive secrets. Leaked documents exposed the full extent of Soviet infiltration and their plans for technological theft. He possessed the most valuable intelligence the CIA could ask for. Once his credibility was established, the CIA provided Vetrov with a spy camera. A sophisticated counterintelligence operation was devised by the CIA involving dead drop locations all over Moscow. Vetrov would use these dead drops to pass along intelligence film reels. The reels were then collected, developed in Germany, and legally transferred to the USA. Approximately 400 pages of classified documents were exposed through Vetrov's recordings. In today's digital era, that may seem like a small amount. But back then, when every piece of information was recorded on paper, this was a massive intelligence trove. Detent was nothing more than a facade. Decades of deception were unmasked, along with the theft of past and future technologies. Now, the challenge for the CIA was deciding how to respond. They had to be extremely cautious. They couldn't take down all the Soviet spies at once. If they did, the KGB would undoubtedly realize someone had betrayed them. The CIA director knew he had been handed a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He had no intention of arresting them. It wouldn't achieve much. When every move of your enemy is in the palm of your hand, capturing them yields little additional value. Instead, the CIA director shared the documents with a very special individual, the same man who once told Thomas Reed not to worry. That's right, it was Gus Weiss. Gus Weiss had been working with the CIA on technology transfer operations since the 1970s. For years, he had been an astute observer, constantly warning that the Soviets were exploiting detent to steal technology. But time and again, he had been ignored. When Weiss visited CIA headquarters, he was met with indifference. Their attitude was, why would the Soviets even need to do that? Finally, in 1981, Weiss had enough evidence to prove he had been right all along. He was deeply impressed by the scale and success of Soviet operations up to that point. But he also realized that the list in his hands was the key to defeating the Soviet Union. The companies whose secrets had been stolen also agreed to assist Weiss. He suggested that these corporations continue manufacturing their stolen equipment, but with subtle modifications. Just small tweaks, including a piece of malware. Its purpose was to deceive the Soviets into believing they had succeeded while, in reality, their stolen technology was defective. Weiss presented his plan to Reagan, who was absolutely thrilled by the idea. It was a brilliant strategy sabotaging stolen technology, thereby crippling an entire Soviet system from within. But that wasn't enough for Gus Weiss. He had a grander, more sophisticated plan in mind. He wanted to set the stage for a major event. Now that the Soviet espionage program had been exposed, the stolen technologies would be turned against them. And the CIA had its sights set on a critical Soviet asset, the Trans-Siberian gas pipeline. By the 1980s, the Soviet Union was financially drained after decades of an arms race. Transporting gas from Siberia to Europe was their only way out of economic collapse. Construction of the massive pipeline had begun in 1978, during the detent period. Western companies were eager to sell turbines and computer systems to the Soviets. Whether one liked it or not, the project heavily relied on Western European technology. The pipeline came from Germany, the compressor stations from Italy, and various other high-tech components from across Europe. It was expected to generate billions of dollars annually. But after the 1981 espionage revelation, detent was no longer an option. It was time for America to take a new approach. For years, the America had sat idly by while the Soviets strengthened their defense capabilities and global influence. In response, Reagan banned American companies from selling equipment for the pipeline. But America's European allies didn't see things the same way. They needed Soviet gas and were eager to help complete the pipeline as soon as possible. And so, the CIA selected the pipeline as its target for retaliation against the losses suffered by the USA. But why the pipeline? The gas pipeline explosion occurred near Tobolsk, about 100 kilometers west of the Soviet city of Chelyabinsk. The blast was so powerful that NORAD, North American Aerospace Defense Command, issued an alert after detecting warning signals from reconnaissance satellites. It could have been a nuclear weapons test or a tactical missile launch by the Soviet Union. Upon analysis, the explosion's power was found to be equivalent to 3,000 tons of TNT. As we know, a massive pipeline like this must pass through terrain with varying elevations. At each point, pressure regulators are needed to maintain the proper flow of gas. Whenever the pipeline crosses hills or rivers, it requires a system strong enough to maintain sufficient pressure for uninterrupted transport. A 4,800 km long system required hundreds of pumps and compressor stations. The explosion was believed to have been caused by someone remotely altering the pressure levels at these compressor stations. A faulty computer signal could have triggered a chain reaction, leading to human error. If a computer issued a false low-pressure reading, a technician might manually increase the pressure at least. That was the theory. An incorrect pipeline pressure led to catastrophic consequences. The Siberian explosion wasn't the only example of such an incident. In 2010, the city of San Bruno, California, was shaken when an underground gas pipeline suddenly exploded. The explosion killed at least 4 people, injured more than 50 others, and destroyed at least 50 homes. But in this case, the Soviet pipeline was on an entirely different scale. The story of the CIA's attack on the Siberian pipeline was first revealed by Thomas Reed, a former Reagan administration official, in his 2004 book about the Cold War. According to Reed, the entire pipeline system, including gas pumps, valve controls, and station operations, was automated, functioning like a massive computer system. It was controlled by a SCADA system, produced and installed by the company, unbeknownst. Seeing a unique sabotage opportunity, the CIA bribed a computer specialist at the company to steal a copy of the SCADA system's access codes. After obtaining the access codes, CIA cyber experts infiltrated the network, managing the Trans-Siberian gas pipeline. There, they implanted a logic bomb, a highly sophisticated computer virus, into the SCADA software, crippling the entire control system. By the afternoon of June 15, 1982, the CIA activated the logic bomb, paralyzing the SCADA system. This caused gas to be compressed at dangerously high levels within the pipeline near Tobolsk, leading to an inevitable massive explosion. The CIA remained completely silent on the matter, refusing to acknowledge any involvement in the Siberian explosion. A brief statement implied that the West had supplied the Soviets with faulty turbines and defective military-grade microchips. Nowhere did it mention an attack on the Siberian pipeline. The CIA did not want people digging deeper into the issue. No other sources could verify the incident. Perhaps the greatest victory lay in the secret war between President Reagan and the Soviet Union. Gus Weiss's plan was clever. If the Soviets realized they had been supplied with faulty equipment, they still couldn't easily fix the problem. Given the vast number of components and systems sourced from the West, there was no way for Moscow to replace them all. As Reagan increased pressure from the USA, the Soviet Union edged closer to the prospect of using nuclear weapons. Both sides were caught in a severe crisis of trust. The USA refused to accept the Soviet theft of technology, exploiting detent for its own gain. Meanwhile, the Soviet Union was infuriated by a devastating retaliation it couldn't counter. According to historical records, the situation had become extremely dangerous. Once again, the world stood on the brink of nuclear war. To understand the atmosphere at the time, we must rewind more than 20 years to 1962, when another confrontation brought the world close to annihilation. It all began when the United States deployed 15 PGM-19 Jupiter medium-range missiles in Turkey. These missiles were capable of carrying nuclear warheads and could easily strike Moscow and most major industrial and administrative centers. The PGM-19 Jupiter missiles could reach their targets in just 10 minutes. But in reality, the Soviet Union had no effective defense against a potential American attack. Moreover, at the time, the Soviet Union lagged significantly behind the USA in strategic nuclear weapons. They possessed far fewer warheads and delivery systems. While the Soviet Union had only 300 warheads and bombs, the U.S. had around 6,000. The question was, could the Soviet Union retaliate if an incident occurred? Positioned so close and in such a dangerous location, the PGM missiles severely altered the balance of power. The Soviet response was swift and unmistakably in line with Nikita Khrushchev's leadership style. Since the Americans had deployed missiles right at their doorstep, the Soviets would place missiles in America's backyard. That backyard was Cuba. Furthermore, Cuban leader Fidel Castro had long sought a closer relationship with Moscow. And this was how he would get it. In other words, Fidel Castro had no objections to such a decision. He had his own specific reasons for wanting Soviet military reinforcements and nuclear weapons on the island of freedom. As a socialist nation, Cuba was like a bone stuck in Washington's throat. Castro understood that it was only a matter of time before the USA attempted to bring democracy to the island through bombs and missiles. So, the presence of Soviet forces might serve to cool the hot heads in Washington. Thus, the Soviet Union launched Operation Anadir, deploying over 20 R-12 medium-range ballistic missiles capable of striking targets 2,000 kilometers away, along with 16 R-16 missiles with double the range. Each missile could carry a thermonuclear warhead with a 1 megaton yield enough to hit Washington and most strategic air bases. The crisis escalated when US U-2 reconnaissance planes began scouring the skies over Cuba, identifying Soviet missile sites. Aerial reconnaissance images were first sent to the CIA, then to the Pentagon and the White House. For U.S. leaders, this news was a cold, hard wake-up call. High-level emergency consultations were immediately held to devise a response. Eventually, 3 main options were considered. First, launch a preemptive strike against the Soviet Union before it was too late. Second, invade Cuba. Or third, impose a total blockade on the island. In the end, the U.S. chose the third option, a blockade, to prevent things from spiraling out of control. However, new photos surfaced on October 26th, showing additional missile site construction. Cuban leader Castro sent a personal letter to Soviet leader Khrushchev urging him to use nuclear weapons against the America if they attempted to invade and occupy Cuba. In his letter, Fidel Castro wrote, "I tell you this because I believe the imperialist forces are extremely dangerous in their aggression. And if they attempt to invade Cuba, an act of brutal violation of global law and morality, then the time will have come to eliminate this danger forever as an act of legitimate self-defense. Although this solution is severe, there is truly no other alternative." Meanwhile, Soviet leader Khrushchev wrote to U.S. President Kennedy, stating his willingness to remove the missiles from Cuba if the America pledged never to invade the island. "I propose this. On our part, we will declare that our ships heading to Cuba will not carry any weapons or military equipment. And in return, you will declare that the USA will not invade Cuba with its own forces, nor support any group intending to do so. If this happens, then there will be no need for our military presence in Cuba." The U.S.-Soviet tensions reached their peak on October 27, a day now known as Black Saturday. Soviet leader Khrushchev sent President Kennedy another letter with stronger terms, including a demand to remove American Jupiter ballistic missiles from Turkey. Meanwhile, a Soviet-supplied surface-to-air missile shot down a U.S. U-2 reconnaissance plane over Cuba. The pilot was killed. On October 28th, the Soviet Union announced that it would remove its missiles from Cuba, ending the confrontation. Khrushchev's letter to Kennedy detailed the agreement to dismantle the missiles in exchange for the USA pledging not to invade Cuba. President Kennedy issued a statement praising Khrushchev's decision to withdraw the missiles. Kennedy declared, "This is an important and constructive contribution to peace. It is my earnest hope that the governments of the world can, with a solution of the Cuban crisis, turn their urgent attention to the compelling necessity for ending the arms race and reducing world tensions." The crisis of trust following the collapse of Detente had finally come to an end. After Vetrov was executed for treason, no actual war broke out. Once again, the world had narrowly avoided an apocalyptic disaster. Although doubts remain about whether the CIA was truly behind the Siberian pipeline explosion, one thing is clear: a new weapon had been deployed against an enemy: modified computer chips. It could be considered the first shot fired in the ongoing technological warfare of the cyber age. Perhaps we are once again waiting and holding our breath for the next moment on the brink of global catastrophe. Maybe in the distant future. But for now, this video comes to an end. Goodbye, see you in the next video, and have a great day.